Good morning,
Hello.
good
Good
afternoon, good
evening.
evening
Good
from
afternoon.
not so sunny UK
Yes, from
at the moment, anyway.
very late summer Japan, very hot and humid, and a huge typhoon is making its way up towards
Whoa!
south of the country. So some rain is
Oh my gosh!
in the
Yeah.
works. Yeah. Well,
Yes.
so how have you
Scary.
been?
Uh, been well overall, save
Hmm.
for my neck and other things like that. But it's getting sorted. It'll get.
Oh,
It's
good.
always
What happened?
ongoing. These things, it's basically, samsaric impermanence related aspects of
Yeah,
life. Yeah. So, and things
for sure.
deteriorate over time, don't they? In samsara, you know,
Nothing lasts and nothing
Bir-
stays the same.
rebirth or birth, sickness, old age, and death. These are the things we have to
Yes.
look forward to in samsara.
Well, yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Yes.
Uh,
Uh, so yeah, how was the lecture?
oh, it was great. It was wonderful. In fact, what a coincidence, I thought. Some of the chapters of Tawny Show that Kobai Sensei's lecture was on um, are directly related to the questions you asked.
Oh, really? That's funny. Yeah, one of the questions was kind of a group question
Yeah,
that we all kind of
yeah.
had. We wanted the first part I sent you to ask
Mm.
me, Jason, and someone else wanted to
Hmm.
have some, just have further elaboration on that passage and what Kobai Sensei wrote about it, and some
Mm.
just as much as we, as much particular as we could.
Yeah.
And then yeah, the second question was my own, but they're all related. They were all kind of tied in nicely
Right.
tied in nicely
Yeah.
with what Kobai Sensei lectured on.
Mm. Yeah. In fact, the passage in Tawny Show was well, there was a lot of really good stuff because we talked about the passage in Tawny Show where um, it's talking about evil and what motivates us to do evil, and Yuinbo asking Shinron, or Shinron asking Yuinbo, do you believe what I'm teaching you? And
Ah,
Yuinbo says yes,
yeah.
and Shinron says, so then you will do whatever I tell you to do. And Yuinbo says, yeah, of course. And then Shinron says, well, in that case, I want you to kill 1,000 people, and then your birth in the Pure Land will be assured.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
Yuinbo answers, now of course Shinron doesn't really, of course doesn't want Yuinbo to go kill people. He's making a point. He's making a teaching example, right?
yeah.
And Yuinbo replies, well, I don't, even though you say that, I don't have the ability to kill even one person, let alone 1,000 people. And then
Exactly.
Shinron says, yes, well, that's exactly true. And yet, even someone who has the best intentions could, through their karmic causes and conditions, end up inadvertently, uh, you know, causing harm and doing things that they don't want to do. So it's kind of a lesson on karma and its effects. But yeah, it was great. There was the that passage in particular had some really good. In fact, I kind of want to find the exact passage and read it just very quickly.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
there's so much good stuff in Tawny Show.
Should
It
we
really is.
so today should we, um since that sort of came up, should we continue with the sort of a bamboo's life?
Yeah. Let's go
Things
ahead and
along that
address
line,
the
or
questions you
should
asked.
we, or should we just go have this be a clearing the channels sort of
Yeah,
session?
either way is good. I think
And
this one, let's start for okay, let's just start with some text from Tana Show, and then
okay.
your questions I think were really great. So I want to address, I want to discuss those questions if we can.
Okay, yeah. Then yeah, I think we'll just go with we haven't done a clearing the channels session in a while. So let's go with that.
Yeah,
yeah, because they were questions, along that line of under questions, not necessarily doubts, but just questions about how does that work exactly.
Exactly, yeah. I do want to read really quickly because I sort of retold it from memory, but I want to read exactly what the text says.
Sure.
Further, the master once asked, the master is Shinron, Yuinbo, do you accept all that I say? Yes, I do, I answered. Then will you not deviate from whatever I tell you? He repeated. I humbly affirmed this. Thereupon he said, now I want you to kill 1,000 people. If you do, you will definitely attain birth. I responded, though you instruct me thus, I'm afraid it is not in my power to kill even one person. Then why did you say that you would follow whatever I told you? Shinron continued, by this you should realize that if we could always act as we wished, then when I told you to kill 1,000 people in order to attain birth, you should have immediately done so. But since you lack the karmic cause inducing you to kill even a single person, you do not kill. It is not that you do not kill because your heart is good. In the same way, a person may not wish to harm anyone and yet end up killing 100 or 1,000 people. Thus, he spoke of how we believe that if our hearts are good, then it is good for birth, and if our hearts are evil, it is bad for birth, failing to realize that it is by the inconceivable working of the vow that we are saved. And then it goes on to explain that there was in those days a person who had fallen into wrong views. He asserted that since the vow was made to serve the person who had committed evil, one should purposely do evil as an act for attaining birth. As rumors of misdeeds gradually spread, Shinron wrote in a letter, do not take a liking to poison just because there is an antidote. This was in order to put an end to that wrong understanding. It by no means implies that evil can obstruct one's attainment of birth. And so that's a very important passage. And then he goes on and says, the master further stated, for those who make their living drawing nets or fishing in the seas and rivers, and those who sustain their lives hunting beasts or taking fowl in the fields and mountains, and those who pass their lives conducting trade or cultivating fields and paddies, it is all the same. If the karmic cause so prompts us, we will commit any kind of act. And then Yuinbo says, and this passage kind of rang a bell for me. These days, however, one finds people making a show of themselves as seekers for the afterlife, posting notices at Nimbutsu practice halls saying that those who have committed such and such acts may not enter, as though only good persons should say the Nimbutsu. Are not people who do this indeed outwardly expressing signs of wisdom, goodness, or diligence, while inwardly embracing falsity? And I think, especially on the internet, there's certainly a lot of those seekers for the afterlife. People posting, selfies of them in Buddhist robes.
Yeah. Yes. Lots of cosplay. Lots of Buddhist cosplay and dressing up and photo opportunities. Very very of like Buddhist tropes almost, in
Yeah.
idyllic settings, and anyway.
Yeah. And especially, you know, making good and evil and all of this like some sort of litmus test and passing, you've gotta can't do this and that and all of this stuff.
Yes, smuggling in
It's
precepts where there are none.
smuggling in precepts, yeah. So that is all not really, that's kind of a divergence from true, Jodo Shinshu is what Tanisha was saying here. And then the passage that related to your question. So could you just briefly like recap your question about the 20th vow and people who are following, and just for the benefit of the video here so that it has context.
No worries. So the right, so the passage was from the I think it was the Hymns of the Pure Land, number 66. Those who say the name in self-power, whether meditative or non-meditative, having indeed taken refuge in the vow that beings ultimately attain birth, will spontaneously, even without being taught, turn about and enter the gate of suchness. And then we were looking at what Kobai Sensei kind of said about the Wasan. So he said, but the Wasan above does not recommend Nambutsu of self-power. The meaning of Hymns on the Pure Land, 66, is that even with the Nambutsu of self-power, one is introduced into the gate of suchness, the 18th vow, by the vow by which beings ultimately attain birth, the 20th vow. And then, so I think this was from him. Ultimately, again, so, we just read the passage. So, ultimately attain. Amida vowed that those who say the name with a mind of self-power will ultimately attain birth. Turn about and enter the gate of suchness means to turn, changing into one who will attain the enlightenment of the Dharma body. I'm not sure I got the right order there of how he wrote all that. And so, we kind of went into my Dharma brothers and I went into we have a weekly Dharma study. Went into a discussion. Actually, this was a discussion on. Actually, we have a ongoing Dharma discussion via a group on Facebook, Facebook Messenger. So that's kind of ongoing off and on throughout the week. But then we have a weekly, and we also discussed it at our weekly Dharma study. And so there was discussion of thinking about past Pure Land practitioners. There are even in other ages that practice the Pure Land Dharma, gate, say in China, that them practicing their their practice eventually would lead to faith. Is that kind of we were asking, is that kind of the implication? I'm not sure if I'm getting this exactly right, how it was raised.
Right.
Something on that line so does that mean, so I'll just break it down to my question about it, kind of, is so does this mean that eventually, even within a lifetime, if somebody, even in a self-power way, it's good to say them, because I've heard teachers, I've heard different Jodo
Mm,
Shinshu people and practitioners kind of say it's good to say Nembutsu. It's good um, to whatever you do in Jodo Shinshu, it's good to do it, even in a self-powered way, even if that's because you kind of, there's no other way to do it. Number one, at first, like you just, you know, unless you,
mm,
you know, your, I guess, I suppose your karmic causes and conditions are very ripe that you immediately receive Shinjin,
mm,
very quickly in this life. But so it's good to sort of fake it till you make it kind of a thing. And that always made sense to me. That always, given the Jodo Shinshu teaching, given what it always, even in the
mm,
early days, that made sense to me. And it seems so embracing. I was like, that's so cool that even though it's not, but it's, you know what I mean? And that just made this real
mhm,
deep sense to me intuitively and every other way. And so, but anyway, so does this sort of passage, the implications passage that if you do that, kind of eventually Shinjin in this lifetime will arise, even if you are just do it, you're just constantly doing it in a self-power way, that eventually that will be the sort of process of Shinjin will kind of, the waters of the Dharma will kind of wear down your
mm,
inclinate, wear down that self-power, and it turns into, you just are then eventually doing it
mm,
in a non-self-powered way, in another powered way. It changes you. It changes, eventually will change you within this, and you'll receive settle. Your Shinjin will become settled. Is that what it's saying, or is it saying also that in another lifetime, if it's
mm,
good that you at least do it in this lifetime in this way, because that kind of then is part of Amita's good causes from the past, and so
mm.
in another lifetime. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Whatever form that is, you you will eventually, Shinjin will arise. Even, do you
Mhm.
see what I'm saying? So, like,
Yeah.
what's the
Um,
implications of, And we
right.
kind of said, it's like we couldn't have these great dark, you wouldn't have all these great Chinese masters and Chinese practitioners of Pure Land, that they're all getting it, like that if they were sincerely practicing, that
Mm,
that the Buddha would not make a. Do you know what I mean? That Amita's light would not
mm.
eventually embrace them. Do you see what I mean? Something along. Anyway, so
Yeah, yeah. Of
kind of
course, of course. So let me share my thoughts
yeah,
about this
yeah,
question because it's a huge question. It's a question that obviously
yes,
you have, but I have had similar. I've thought about similar, topics and questions. So, and then I'll get to how I asked. There's always a little bit of limitation in terms of time and also language barrier and so on when I ask Kobai Sensei questions. So sometimes I have to sort of
yeah,
find the key
the
points
essence,
or
yeah,
that's
yeah,
something that is
yeah,
and some questions are kind of outside the scope of Sensei's field of expertise, so to say. And then so I did get to two of your questions. Um,
okay,
and I was able to ask those. So I want to get to that. But first, just a couple of general thoughts, just from these are my personal thoughts. Um, First of all, about practicers in the past who, maybe were Chinese Pure Land practicers of some other, and not of the Orthodox, or Orthodox, but not of like Shandao's, tr- you know,
yeah, yeah,
teaching or something
yeah.
like that, right? um, Orthodox implies that there's like
It-
some Orthodox
some
transmission of Pure Land from Shantou, which there isn't. So I avoid that. Uh, but anyway, um, the thing is, you got to remember is first of all, there's the Dharma ages, right? So there's the age of the right
exactly.
Dharma, where there's practice, or there's teaching, practice, and realization. All three exist.
Yep.
And then there's the age of the semblance Dharma, where you have the teaching and you have the practice, but there's no realization. And then there's the age of the well, it's shozo matsu, so matsu, or the end of the false dharma. False, not in the sense of um, untrue, but the final age of the dharma, mappo, right? In which only the teaching remains, and there is no practice or realization, and that's where we are.
Yeah.
Now, the Chinese Pure Land practitioners, Shantou and so on, they were still in the age of the semblance dharma, I guess you could probably say. So there was teaching and there was practice. But what you have to remember.
Can I just interrupt you really
please.
quickly, Richard? I want to just point out something that you've just made. You just simplified the three ages and framed it in a way that makes it make so much sense, and it's so easy to remember that I've never heard anybody frame it in the way you just did, and right along the lines of the teaching, practice, realization. That was it Zoho, Shoho, Mappo? Is that right? That's the three. So Zoho. Which one's first?
Matsu.
Okay, so Shoho is first. Yeah, Shoho is all three. You've got all three because they're still it's still fully kind of effective because of combination of the Buddha, the Buddha field of the Buddha and the karmic causes of human beings are still such that there's enough there. Karmically speaking, or merit wise or virtue wise, that all three are in place and effective, and that in Shoho it's only the teaching and practice that are still kind of available and effective.
In Zoho, right?
But it won't. And so sorry. So it's Shoho Zoho. Yeah, sorry. Shoho, Zoho, Mappo. Yeah. So in Shoho, it's all three. Zoho, it's just teaching and practice that are still available and effective to an extent, but not for realization. And then Mappo, only the teaching is available.
Yeah.
But not the effectiveness of practice and realization. That's all due to our lack of merit and karma, not the teaching itself, not the practice and realization, but on all three of those levels. But and then it makes sense that at some point, even the teaching, even that last remaining teaching disappears, and only the name will exist for like 100 years or whatever. But anyway, I've never heard it. I just wanted to point that out in case no one else has ever heard that breakdown in that way. It makes so much sense. There's the different descriptions of what it is, but that really makes it really congealed it for me. Just from the standpoint of, that's how Shinran starts to talk about his in Kyogyo Shinshu is it's all the teaching practice, realization, Shinjin, all those different it just brought it into that, and how we talk about the reverse polarity, so with those are disappearing, so as those are, each one is disappearing, you need Amida Buddha had to come in, other power had to come in and fill the fill in the realization in Zoho, and then the and now the practice and and the realization in Mappo, and obviously illumine the teaching for us in Mappo, too, as well, and always all always through all the ages he was illuminating the teaching. Actually, but anyway, I'd never heard that before. It really just things when you said that, it just
great.
A ton of things just clicked together in that one right there. So that was a big chunk just got loosened going down the stream now from the channels. A big thing just got cleared right there. But anyway, thanks. Yeah. So please continue then. Yeah.
Well,
or
yeah,
comment
that's
on that,
how I
or comment
learned.
on that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's how I learned. How I learned the three ages, or how they were taught to me at Chuo Bukkyo Gakuin's correspondence course, and also my learning and study of Jodo Shinshu. So I agree. It's very easy to remember.
Yeah.
The three ages you have.
And as
yeah,
everything's just disappearing.
Yeah.
One by one.
So I wanted to point that out. I also wanted to say, from a broader perspective, we have to keep in mind that every teaching, right, given by Shakyamuni works.
Exactly. That's why I said.
There's nothing.
That's why.
Work.
That's what I said. That's what I've said earlier. That was the caveat. I said when they become the teaching and the practice and the realization become ineffective because of us, not because of the teaching.
Right. Yeah.
Teaching,
not because
I always give, whenever I talk
about
the waning effectiveness, it's because of the karma of sentient beings lacking the merit, lacking, progressively more lacking the merit, lacking the virtue, lacking the karmic causes for it to be effective, not because of the teaching isn't effective. It's the Buddha's teaching. It comes from the Buddha. It comes from the Buddha mind. It comes from, so it's, of course, it's perfect. Whatever teaching it is, whether it's provisional or it's from the Buddha. So, you know what I mean? It's just ineffective in our hands. It's ineffective because of us.
Right.
That's, I always careful to the age that we live in, etc. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And then Shinran kind of takes it a step further. It's not just, it's I am incapable of any practice whatsoever. It's me.
Yes, definitely.
Going one step beyond a communal kind of like going from us to me, right?
Me, yeah. It comes back to me. Because, who's the evil person?
Again, the teaching is always for me, in Buddhism. It's not for other people, right? And of course, for us, right? But us means us is, me, right?
Yeah. So, when I say us, I mean me.
Yeah, there is no us without each of us, right?
There's no us.
So
There's
each
no
of
us.
Yeah. So each of us, has to listen and encounter and engage with the teaching on a one-to-one, level, right? And so now, so all teachings are effective if they're practiced, correctly. But of course, the capacities of sentient beings differ. So we don't really need, I don't think, to be too concerned about, sages who were adept at practicing, Zen meditation or Nimbutsu or Pure Land or whatever those practices are. Because, from a Jodo Shinshu perspective, they are provisional teachings that are intended to bring people who rely on their own power to encounter other power, right? To the vow is like where it all comes from. And I want to say too, all rivers eventually reach the ocean.
Yes.
No matter where they come from. So the ocean of the vow is such that it attracts, now it may take many lifetimes speaking, it may take a long time in our lifetime, but the vow is always drawing, everyone in. And Shinran says that Amida's guidance of every individual living being, Amida is constantly guiding and sustaining and supporting and leading people, everyone, every being, wherever they are, at whatever state of spiritual development or whatever, and so that's, I think, important to realize, and that's kind of the purpose of the 19th and 20th vows, is they are to I think we discussed before, it's kind of like they're like signposts, pointing turn right, 18th vow that way,
Yeah, exactly.
and
just like the what do you call it, I can't remember the name of that famous depiction of the Mara with the holding the Buddhist depiction of the Buddhist cosmology, the mandala of Mara holding the wheel. And yet even in that, we talked about this before, where there's 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 a monk, and there's, I think, other things pointing toward Amita's pure land. Go there. Go there. This is all you're stuck. Go there.
Yeah, and now about the 19th and 20th vows, though, is I think part of your question was, if a person practices the Nimbutsu of self-power, through that practicing, will they eventually attain Shinjin, right? Was kind of what you were asking?
Yeah, not necessarily. No, I was asking, it was more was putting it like, if they're doing that, not their self-power will bring it about, but because of Amita's light and his power, kind of, and then becoming, gradually becoming open to Amita's light and power, kind of, not that their self-power is bringing it about, but that process allows in kind of Amita's power it'll turn, their practice will turn into another power practice. Do you see what I mean? Eventually, because of Amita's power. That's kind of what I was.
Yeah.
Even if they're just.
There's a concept called Sangon Tenyu, which means turning through the vows, the three vows. And it refers to the 19th, 20th, and 18th vows. And the idea is that someone who practices the 19th vow will at some point turn into the 20th vow. And then from there, they will turn into the 18th vow. So there is this idea. Now, the caution is that people get stuck in the cul-de-sac and miss the on-ramp, so to speak. So, again, for the 20th vow, is based on practicing the Nimbutsu as a sort of a merit-making device, right? And then transferring the good of one's own actions with a sincere mind towards birth in the Pure Land. Of course, there are many Pure Land Buddhists even today who follow this kind of practice, right? And Shinran, in a letter, says, well, first I want to say that Shinran also followed this practice, right? And then he gave it up and took refuge in the vow, the 18th vow. And he describes it as, I abandoned the birth that is unimaginable and took refuge in the 18th vow. So there is a point where this turning is not, it's not like a natural, gradual, like you will attain Shinjin through practicing the self-power Nimbutsu, right? There's a definite eshin or turning of the heart mind that has to occur, and that's what happened in Shinran's case, right? He didn't. He says he actually, we should find the passage because we want to make sure we're getting the.
While you're searching, so while you're searching for that, kind of I think that's what I kind of was partly what I was meaning was, will Amita's through that, using those other vows, will that bring about that change of heart? You see what I'm saying? Through Amida through Amida's power, through Amida's light. It just, there seems to this, and there's not just this passage that seems to suggest things like that. There's other ones where it says beings will be made to do this, or there's a command to do that. The beings will, it's almost like it's like this inevitable thing that once you enter the path of the Nembutsu, eventually you will, do you see what I'm saying? You will have Settle Chinchin, you will have,
Right.
It just seems like, it's almost like there's this resistance is futile. do you know what I mean? You will be
Yes.
assimilated.
Yes. Well, that
in a good way,
is,
in a really
true,
really
yeah.
good way, not in an evil Borg way. So
right. Uh-oh, I hope I can find this. Now I'm starting to have doubts here. Thinking of a keyword. Now, I did want to mention, so let's go ahead and leave it there because it looks like I'm not going to be able to find the passage.
But,
okay.
So just talk about can you talk about the essence of what you were gonna draw from that passage? Yeah, just talk about.
Yeah. And the essence is that, he abandoned the 20th vow and took refuge in the 18th vow. And so there is a lot of ideas. Like there's one Shinshu group that says that you have to do this Sangon Tenyu, you have to, and sometimes they say like you'll do the 19th vow in one lifetime and the 20th vow in the next lifetime, and then you encounter the 18th vow in this lifetime or something like that. But I asked Kobai Sensei, so this is how I phrased this question. I asked, for people who feel like they aren't necessarily 100% settled with Shinjin, they're still, maybe they're still having some doubts, or they're still, but they're on the path, they're resolving and so on. But they're saying the Nimbutsu. Should those people be considered to be practicers of the 20th vow, while they're still in that stage of saying the Nimbutsu? And Kobai Sensei's reply was, there's really no need to explain the 3 vows to such people, because even people who are in that stage of seeking and listening, and they should also be encouraged to say the Nimbutsu as an expression of gratitude. So Shinran Chonin says that people should, he often says, we should respond in gratitude to the Buddha's benevolence, right? And that, of course, is the true, when we really understand the true meaning of the Nimbutsu, that is what the Nimbutsu becomes, right? Which is Shomyo-ho, so that was Kobai Sensei's reply. But then he also said, and he used an interesting phrase. He said with Tariki Poi Shukyo, which means other power-like religions, and like Jodo Shinshu, of course. But I asked what other religions would be like other power-ish or other power-like, and he said that Zen, there is some in the Zen tradition. There are definite aspects that are similar to the idea of other power in giving up one's own calculation to some degree. Now, Zen, of course, is a different school. They don't take refuge in the vow of Amida per se in that way, in the same way we do.
I would also argue there's a bit of that, a similar thing in Nichiren Buddhism. There's a bit where you can kind of go, well, they're not really relying on themselves, they're relying on the on the power of the sutra, the power of the Hanzan, power of the.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They're not really.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah, there's talk of summoning efforts and da da da, but they're really anyway. But yeah, so it's just I could say I think there's a similar thing going on there as well, but of kind of another
and
an attempt at other power, or a kind of
right.
a kind of indirect other power, because they, yeah. Anyway, sorry, yeah, go.
Well, and also like the Theravada's episode story of that one teacher I mentioned during the Shaku Brothers episode,
Yeah,
I think always strikes me as a very other power like event.
Yeah,
It's not that it's following all the it's not Jodo Shinshu, of course, it's Theravada, but it is very other power-ish, right? In that sense. So, but since I said it's kind of like, and this relates to your other questions, so now we should probably talk about your question that you had, which was how does the 10 benefits. So do we begin to experience these benefits as we are in the process of a journey towards Shinjin being settled? And I asked Sensei that question. And since Kobai Sensei's response was no. And I
love when he does that.
I sort of wanted to, but isn't it true that if we say the Nimbutsu, we start to feel grateful and so on? And Kobai Sensei's response was, yes, but we can't necessarily call that the benefit in the sense that it's intended in this particular passage. Yeah. And this did remind me, in the larger sutra where it talks about Shakyamuni's intention to provide, to give living beings, to bless them with the true benefit. And in Jodo Shinshu, this true benefit is understood to mean, liberation through the vow in the Nimbutsu and in Shinjin, right? So when we're talking about these true benefits, the main benefit is really entering the stage of the correctly settled, or the truly settled. That is kind of the core. And then the other of those benefits are sort of related, kind of flow from that. But the real meaning is that we can live here and now in this life, not like waiting, with anxiety for the moment of death, if Amida will appear or not. Not thinking, I'll get enlightened in the next world. Not that kind of stuff, but actually entering, and Kobai Sensei, of course, he writes about this a lot, actually entering that world of salvation, if you will, of liberation in this life, here and now. And we always say in Jodo Shinshu, salvation is here and now. It's right here, right now. It's not something that we have to wait for or look forward to, when we're on our deathbed. It's
we're a birth man walking.
Yes.
Once Shinjin settles and arises, settles.
Yeah,
fully,
yeah.
We're birth men walking. Birth man walking. Yeah.
And so this entering into that stage, that experience of being embraced by infinite light and wisdom, just as we are. No need to change, nothing to do. We are as we are, here and now, embraced by this infinite light and sustaining power of Amida. This is the true benefit. This is what it's all about. Everything else is trying to get us there, right? To get us to that experience in this lifetime, here and now. So when you think about it that way, it is true that if we're going to talk about the true benefits, it really can only be that experience, that entering into, as Shinron says, he expresses it like my mind is flowing into the Buddha mind, like the mind of the Buddha, like it's very. I mean, that's what we want to. That's what we're here for, right? That's the main dish of Jodo Shinshu. Everything else is an appetizer, right? Up to that point. So,
exactly.
Yeah, and so, I personally think that, like, as we say the Nimbutsu, as we listen, we will experience, greater, in some sense, in some degree, peace of mind, joy, gratitude, that kind of thing. But we have to still kind of, well, like Sensei explained it like this. You can't really understand the, how did he say? You cannot understand the heart of a parent unless you become a parent.
Yeah.
so even if it's only once you have, I don't have kids, but Kobai Sensei does, of course. And according to him, once you have a child of your own, you suddenly understand what a parent, what it is to be a parent and have a child. And he said, and this is where the Tariki, other power-like religions, do have this real insistence that we have to get there, or we have to experience that in order to, we sort of have to taste Shinjin for ourselves in order to really experience that religious experience. So, and that's the analogy of having a child. You understand what it is to have a child, and by entering into that ocean of faith or Shinjin, you understand what the significance of that is. You understand it for yourself, and there's a sense in which it's hard to explain religious experiences to people who don't have them, and so on. But so I don't know if that answers your question satisfactorily or not, but that is, Kobai Sensei's, that was his response to that question. And I think, Jodo Shinshu has, I think, always struggled a little bit with giving people something to do.
Yeah.
And I do think that it is, of course, good to say the Nimbutsu, and ultimately it's listening, right? Chomon, listening to the Dharma. This is what, brings us, as the waters of the Dharma flow over our our stony minds and hearts, the change occurs, right? But to go back to the 20th vow, there is we're not encouraged to take up the Nimbutsu of self-power. And that's what Sensei means in that passage in the book, Understanding Jodo Shinshu. If we are already on the road, so to speak, we no longer need the signpost, right? Like we've already made the turn, so to speak, into Jodo Shinshu. So we're already on the highway, so to speak,
on the path.
And it's a question of getting ultimately to the destination, which we will get there. And sometimes it seems like we won't, but we will. Just trust the, you have to trust in the working of infinite
in trust,
wisdom, infinite compassion.
The very thing, in trust. We have to trust. But yeah, it's trust the path. So, I've pointed this out before in other places. There's this part in Kyoyo Shinshu where, and it leapt off the page to me when I finally read it the other month, or not finally read it, but just finally, I'd read it before, but it hadn't done that thing that go in, or that it hadn't clicked. And he says something along the lines of, I entrust, either as I entrust or I entrust myself to the teaching, practice, and realization of and it's like, that's kind of, if we can't, if we're not fully entrusted to Amida, if we're not, if I don't feel like I have settled Shinjin, or that hasn't kind of arisen yet or occurred yet, in sort of the present, whatever that is, then I am entrusting to the path. I am trusting this path. I am trusting the Jodo Shinshu path. I am trusting the things that I'm meant to be doing. Like we're doing right now. With having a Dharma dialogue. And there's a point. And this is kind of where the surrender comes in. Again, with this waters of the Dharma, just kind of eventually, you just go with the flow. You just, the surrender. There's a kind of surrender that kind of happens, even without you knowing it. Like I remember we talked about how at one point I told you that I made this decision at some point last year that whether I Shinjin or no Shinjin, I'm going to die a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist. I felt like it was this major kind of decision. All my chips are in with Jodo Shinshu. That's it. But I've come to kind of realize that actually what it is I know I'm inevitably going to keep coming back to this path. And that everything is going to keep pointing me back to this path, no matter how many times over the 15, 16, 17 years, however long it's been that I've been on the Jodo Shinshu path, that I've said, okay, or I've gone off to some other Buddhist path, or 95 non-Buddhist ways kind of thing, or and inevitably all those things led me back here. It was similar with Buddhism as well. It was similar just in general with Buddhism. Before I knew Jodo Shinshu, I would the animal world has joined us.
No
the
problem.
Animal realm has joined our Dharma discussion. So with Buddhism, I would go to other, I'm going to go over here and check out Taoism for a while, or this or that or the other thing. And inevitably, I'd always wind up saying, well, that's what Buddhism says. Even science. I'd be like, I go to just just secular philosophy, and I'd be like, that's what Buddhism says. So it says it better, it teaches it better. So first that surrender, I think, came with Buddhism in general. I just kind of surrendered to that. Buddhism is the is the supreme kind of path. And then the same thing has kind of happened with Jodo Shinshu, so I want, so that's an example. Like I thought it was this, this very, resolved decision, that I'm going to die a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, whether I have Shinjin or not, and it's actually, I was talking about this with my Dharma brothers the other night, like actually what's going on there is I just kind of surrendered to the fact that inevitably not only Buddhism is right, but Yoda Shinshu is right. I'm gonna wind up back here every time. It's gonna. I might go off in some tributary, from the
Yeah.
stream, and wind up in a puddle maybe even for a while. But eventually, that's
Yeah.
gonna overflow and head me back toward the stream, and I'm gonna wind up back here. So it's kind of like you know, um, it's kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
you know,
It
I
reminds me of,
kind of a
I believe it
surrender rather
was,
than a decision almost.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's what we kind of talked about was so much we
Mhm.
kind of realized later we thought was this, decision we
Right.
made, but really it was just surrendering to
Yeah.
the inevitability of the power of it, the truth of it, the inescapableness of it, like the
Yeah.
ocean of the vow. Where am I going to go?
Yeah.
Where am I going to go? In all of
Yeah.
samsara, in every world, in the 10 directions of every universe, of every multiverse, of every, do you know what I mean? And then, down, like I talk about going down to the minuscule, subatomic level. Where am I going to go where the light isn't? There's not. It's kind of the ocean of
Yeah.
the how is everywhere. The light is everywhere. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a surrender there too, to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That somehow, and
Definitely.
that's somehow in this thing that I
Mm.
was talking about. Maybe it's not
Right.
what that teaching says, but just talking about this process, there's is
Hmm.
part of it is just surrender to
Yeah.
to the power of
I
the
think
light,
that's, yeah,
inevitability.
I think that's exactly right. I think that is a better, rather than thinking, oh, I better start saying, as many nimbutsus as I can so that, you know, it'll get me closer to
Yeah,
Shinjin or that kind of thing. I think your approach that you described is a lot better and clearly more in line in well, not in line, but um it's more like Jodo Shinshu. I think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
definitely the natural way, right?
It-
It's Jinin Ho Ni, the natural working of the dharmic power is, you know, what it's all about.
wearing you down. Yeah, just yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's yeah, exactly. The natural working of the vow, the natural.
Yeah.
It
And
is.
what you
It's
said also reminded me, I think it was Vasubandhu Bodhisattva, maybe, or it may have been Donron Daishi or Tonlon, but no one who encounters the vow, the power, the primal vow, passes by in vain, it says.
wow.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly
Yes.
so, there's when you talked about coming always being brought back, once you encounter this teaching, once you encounter the vow, you know, you
Yeah.
you can't just pass
Yes.
by as if
Nope.
nothing occurred. It's one passes by in vain. So I
I
think
mean,
that is a
perfect example of that is in my own life is,
mm,
and I'm just all I can talk about is this lifetime. But in the early
mhm,
90s, when I read that Tricycle magazine article about Pure Land Buddhism and different teachings,
yeah,
probably did mention Jodo Shinshu, but it probably was focusing a lot on Chinese and even Tibetan, different, Pure
mm,
Land kind of schools of thought, um, and thinking, oh, when that would be really nice to do that, but I have capacity to, I think I think for me that would be a cop out. That's what this was
yeah,
my arrogant,
yeah,
clueless thinking I had at the time when I read that. Almost like, oh, how quaint, kind of thing.
yeah,
But almost not quite, but
mm,
and it stayed that just reading that one article, and that was, you know, however many decades ago that was,
mm,
and that stayed in the back of my mind for that for like 10 years. It was back there,
yeah,
in there, and that seed was there. And then in the probably mid noughties, I had that experience, that the weight of the samsaric, the realization of just what samsara, the beginnings, I should say, of my real realization of the weight of my own karmic baggage, and our collective karmic baggage, and what samsara was, and the impossibility of escaping it. Literally crushed me, literally. And I went down on my knees, and actually I went like supine, like I went, I remember I was doing ironing, and I just cried out to Amita. But do you know what I mean? But that one moment, just reading that one article stayed with me.
Yeah.
All that time until that moment. And, I knew where to go, I didn't give it that much thought. It was just in all that time that it was just in the back of my mind there. It just was, it was just kind of there lurking, and so that's just that perfect example of just reading one article. And I was never, that was in this lifetime, I was never away from it. I was never, and that was written from it wasn't even written from a Jodo Shinshu perspective.
It was like a general article about
general,
the Pure Land tradition, kind of, right?
So, but so anyway, so I think the surrender and the inevitability, I'm hearing Agent Smith in the back of my mouth. That's the sound of inevitability. But in a good way. The sound of the Nembutsu is the sound of inevitability. The call of the Nembutsu is an inevitability. Anyway, in a good way.
And again, because I think I think that your approach, or I can see how with our conversations this past year so far, I think we started, was it late last year or early in January or February? But
it was this, maybe December, January, somewhere in there. Maybe, I think we were just we started on Zoom in probably January, but before that we were just messaging on
right,
and the occasional phone calls through Messenger type of thing. But we started this sort of proper weekly Dharma dialogue in, I think, January of this year. But anyway, sorry, what were you gonna say?
And I think we've come a long way since then. I mean, I personally feel myself like I have had through these discussions of Jodo Shinshu, I've had so many, I've just noticed so many things have been like, kind of refreshed. Kind of for me. Like, oh yeah, that's right. This is what this teaching says about, this, that, and it's just always, wow. And there's really no end to, it. And like you said about Kyogo Shinto, I mean, it doesn't matter how many times you read these texts. I know for myself, especially notes on Essentials of Faith alone, and some of Shinran's like the shorter commentary works. Every time I read them, it's like I'm reading it for the first time. Like just the way it leaps off the page and is so relevant and fresh. It's really amazing.
It is. I'm getting chills as you're kind of saying this, because this so much, like my thinking has changed so much in such a short span of time about all this, and it's become more and more alive to me. Whereas in the years before, I kind of have glimpses of that kind of sensibility of like, so for a while it'd be that, but now it's just so consistently, the teaching has just come so much alive now through our discussions, through really walking this path the way it's meant to be done, which is what I sought. I finally said, okay, enough is enough. I'm doing this the way it was meant to do. I don't care how many people don't like that. I don't care how many people, think that, oh, you shouldn't be asking or talking about these things. I didn't care. I was done with all the BS and all the,
Yeah.
whatever. I just,
all the posing,
all the posing and
the spiritual posing.
Yeah, I was done with the posers. I was I was done with the posers, definitely.
Yeah.
And I wanted real. I wanted the true and real, and that's what I saw. And it's just, yeah, just my mind's been blown so many times in the course of our discussions, and just made it easier to talk about, and just clearer, and it's
Yeah.
like it just makes it left me thinking, why didn't I do this from the beginning? Why couldn't I see this from the, and why didn't I take Paul up on calling him, all those years ago? He always used to say, "Why don't you call me on Skype? Call me on Skype."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just begin now, probably would have been a different dialogue. He had a different kind of approach to certain things, so maybe I wouldn't have had as full the discussions I'm having now. People are different, things are, but
for sure.
But anyway, I just think, why didn't I, at least I would have gotten a certain, but hey, like causes and conditions and all that.
Totally.
I'm a bamboo, things have to ripen and do what they got to
do.
Yeah,
that is true.
But
yeah, I think, for, your questions, since Kobai Sensei's answers are always very straight and very, Sensei pulls no punches. Let's put it that way.
No, he doesn't. And, I love that. I love that. And it shouldn't have surprised me that was going to be. Now, when you said it, it's like, well, of course. I mean, that's what he emphasizes in all his books, and what I mean, is salvation in this life, salvation here and now. That aspect of non-retrogression, Shinjin. That's what, of course, and that is what it's about.
And the 10 benefits, sort of should be considered as almost like a set, right? They kind of, they're expressions of that, the true benefit of entering, that state and so on. So,
and the one last thing I want to say about this, it also takes out, again, Kobai Sensei has completely ripped any shadow of a doubt of a loophole. We are good at looking for them loopholes. I'm always even when I don't know I'm looking for those loopholes, I'm looking for the loophole. I'm looking for the, maybe I could get through this one, maybe, gone. As soon as Kobai Sensei is on the
another loophole has
in the conversation closed. Another loophole gone. Gone. So
well, this was a great discussion.
It was.
I do, some of the texts, unfortunately I wasn't able to find them, but I do think that there's a lot of material that we've sort of hinted at or referred to that would probably be, could probably make a whole discussion of itself, just those
definitely. Definitely. And I think at some point, some of what we were discussing and touching on could be a full elaboration in a bamboo's life. At some point is how we live this thing, how we, what's that on the kind of everyday practical level,
the practical.
Sorry, I'm just having to turn on the power. I just realized my power is running low, and I just needed to turn the power on for my lead to actually have power. For my computer to actually have power. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I wanted to read those passages from Tanisho, but because I felt that they were so just, needed to be heard. And I thought that when we were, during Sensei's lectures. So